and legal expert. Good evening, doctor.
Good evening, madam.
Thank you for joining us on this show on Nile TV International. So, Doctor, how do you assess Egyptian-African relations in the 63rd Africa Day anniversary?
Well, actually, the Egyptian-African relations, they are strategic relationships, and Egypt, if we remember, Egypt traditionally used to move in the three traditional circles that were defined by President Gamal Abdel Nasser long time ago in 1953 in his book, The Philosophy of the Revolution. Egypt has three main strategic circles: the Arab Circle, the African Circle, and the Islamic Circle. Unfortunately, in previous decades, we neglected our role in the African Circle, but under the leadership of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the new republic now comes back to play its strategic and leadership role in the African continent and African Circle through adopting the present causes and the present concerns of the African nations. In the 1950s and 1960s, Egypt was pioneering the African liberation movements. Today, Egypt is leading the African development movement, and especially voicing the sound of Africa and the sound of the southern countries in their right to obtain finance at just and easy terms. And we've seen President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi echoing such voice in the different summits that he participated in, whether in the G20 summit or the BRICS summit.
So, Doctor, in your opinion, is Egypt's role in Africa sustainable for its position in the continent? Or, in other words, how would you describe Egypt's current role in Africa?
Well, as I told you, Egypt has always been playing a leading or a leadership role in Africa. In the 1950s and 60s, Egypt was the sponsor of the African liberation movements. Today, Egypt is playing the leading role in the African development movement, and especially through the African Free Trade Agreement, through the African Union, through promoting partnerships with African countries, whether we're talking about Central Africa or the Horn of Africa in the East, or Western Africa or South Africa. And Egypt is playing such role through its leadership and through its remarkable presence, whether in the Pan-African organizations like the African Union, or the African economic organizations like the African Export-Import Bank or the African Development Bank, and also through its presence in the international organizations, especially its remarkable presence and membership in the BRICS organization.
So why is Africa strategically important for Egypt, especially on the economic level?
Well, Africa has a paramount strategic importance for Egypt. First of all, the sources of the Nile River, they are in Africa. The Nile provides Egypt with more than 98% of its annual water needs. So this is the lifeblood of Egypt. This on one hand, and on the other hand, if we're talking about the economic importance, we have to remember that now Egypt is trying to modernize its economy from being a rentier economy in the previous decades into becoming a manufacturing and service-based economy and exporting economy. And doing so, we need raw materials, and we have to remember that Africa is always the source of raw materials for the industrial countries, for the industrial world, even during the days of colonialism in the prior or in the pre-1960s era. Also, Africa is a growing and promising market. We're talking about 1.5 billion people. It has a growing and it has an unsaturated consumer base. If we're talking about today the modernization and development of our industrial base, then of course Africa plays a leading role or is one of our main targets, either as a source of raw materials or as a consumer market, and especially that we have competitive advantages vis-a-vis other economic partners with Africa, because of course our proximity to the African markets, so the Egyptian manufactured goods can be transported easily at less cost and at less risk those manufactured goods that are produced in Asia, for example, or even in Europe or in the US.
So, Doctor, why do you think infrastructure is considered one of the most important fields for the African or Egyptian-African economic integration, and the role of Egyptian companies in infrastructure development across the African continent?
Well, the file of the infrastructure development in Africa, actually it's a very big file, and it has many different sides and many different aspects. First of all, you have to understand that the African continent is in a dire need to modernize its infrastructure, and the financing requirements of the African countries to do so are estimated at around maybe 100 to 120 billion dollars per annum. So there is a very big financing gap here and financing requirement here. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, Africa is rich with its natural resources and it's rich with its revenues. And the Egyptian, of course, the Egyptian experience in the construction sector has always been respected by the African countries since the 1950s and 60s, since many of these countries gained their independence. Today, of course, Egypt has been able to modernize and to expand its infrastructure since 2014, since the election of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Talking about the road network, for example, we added more than 7,000 kilometers of roads. We increased the capacity and efficiency of more than 10,000 kilometers of roads. Today, the national road network is more than 31,000 kilometers. We added more than 1,500 roads and bridges since 2014. And different African countries are looking at such growth and development in admiration. And they understand well that the Egyptian construction companies, first of all, they offer competitive prices on the one, and on the other hand, as I said, the proximity of Egypt to Africa plays an important role in the competitive advantage of such companies. And also, of course, there is a cultural proximity and there is a political proximity. So all these factors would enable the Egyptian construction companies to have a very big and promising market in the African country.
So, Doctor, would like to know what exactly is the Canal Trust Ship Services Company, and how will it differ from existing maritime operations between Egypt and East Africa?
Well, actually, the Canal Trust Ship Services Company is not simply another shipping line. Actually, it's designed to become an integrated logistics platform that combines Egypt to East Africa. And it offers an integrated set of services, including maritime transportation, customs clearance, freight forwarding, warehousing, inland logistics, all under one umbrella. And as I said here, the objective is to create a supply chain or an integrated trade corridor that would combine Egypt to East Africa, rather than the previously fragmented services that were offered by different providers. Actually, the Canal Trust company or Canal Trust Ship Services Company is intended to provide end-to-end logistics solution that would first of all connect Egyptian producers and importers and exporters with the East African markets.
So, Doctor, the government says that this is part of a strategy to access new markets. So, what are the specific East African ports and that are the primary targets of Egypt, and what cargo volumes does Egypt realistically expect in year one?
Well, if we're talking about generally what Egypt targets, Egypt now is targeting the whole of Africa, but the new company, the newly established company, it targets the East African markets, targeting the ports mainly of Kenya and Tanzania, and then to Kenya and Tanzania they can serve as a gateway to several landlocked countries like Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, Burundi, and the Republic of Congo. So here we're talking about the East African market, which represents more than 100 million people. We said that the whole African continent represents more than 1.5 billion people, including the East African market, which is 300 million consumers, and they're fastly growing, and this is a highly promising market. Here I'd like also to highlight that the success for such companies should not only be measured by the cargo volume, but it should be looked at in terms of establishing a reliable and regular trade corridor between Egypt and East Africa, and providing solutions to the development of the East African countries through Egyptian hands.
So, Doctor, what are or what opportunities does the African continent free trade area offer Egypt?
Well, actually, the African continental free trade area, it still faces a lot of challenges, I would say. The intra-African trade is no more than 15% of the African international trade. That's compared to 50-60% in Egypt and 60-70% in Europe. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, there is a very big room for achieving industrial integration between Egypt and the African countries. And such integration actually would mean that we have to move beyond traditional exporter-importer relationship to so-called industrial specialization, where each African country would specialize in producing the product that it has the highest advantage. And there should be an exchange of raw materials between the countries and industrial specialization, and this would ultimately lead to increasing the growth rates and increasing the employment and improving the living conditions. But the point here is that we need to have a political will and a political push behind the development, the empowerment of such agreement.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ayman Ghoneim, the economic and legal expert, for being with us and for your valuable information and insight. And ladies and gentlemen, by this we come to the end of tonight's episode of your program Newsroom Live. Thank you for watching. That was Lamia Abdel Sattar. Stay tuned for more Nile TV International.